and welcome to this week's Wildlife Matters podcast. Well, 2025 is already shaping up to be an extraordinary year for weather. The weather often sparks conversations for us Brits, especially this year with spring 2025 being the warmest and the sunniest on record. And hot on its heels, June set a new record as the warmest month for England. Remarkably, we are now experiencing the third heatwave of the year, and the summer has only just begun. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, it is now unequivocal that human activities have contributed to warming the atmosphere, oceans, and land. In simpler terms, climate change is not just a looming threat. It is here, and it is a reality that we must confront. This is particularly concerning for those of us who like to live in tune with nature and can see, hear, and feel these changes. And in this week's Wildlife Matters Investigates, we turn our attention to a different kind of AI. Not artificial intelligence, which poses its own challenges for writers and content creators like Wildlife Matters, but rather Avian Influenza, the bird virus that has jumped species. And it's been some time since our last Wildlife Matters Investigates feature, and with many new listeners since then, we would appreciate any feedback you may have on our wildlife investigative journalism. And as always, we'll spend some precious time in nature during this week's Wildlife Matters Mindful Moments. But first, let's explore the wildlife and nature stories that have caught our attention in this week's Wildlife Matters Nature News. Hello and welcome to this week's Wildlife Matters Nature News, where we take a deeper look into the wildlife and nature stories that have caught our attention this week. And in our first story, Wildlife Matters asks, what happens to wildlife in heat waves? In recent years, we have had some sizzling summers in Britain, with hot and sunny spells becoming more common, and they're not just uncomfortable for humans. You see, our native wildlife has adapted to our temperate climate, so when the thermometer starts edging above 30 degrees on consecutive days, it throws their routines, health, and very survival into chaos. From hedgehogs to herons, wildlife all across the UK feels the pressure when the heat cranks up. Food becomes harder to find. While summer might seem like a season of plenty, extreme heat can dry out the very plants and insects many species rely on. The grass stops growing, flowers wilt, and the insects that depend on them vanish when they are needed most. For species like bats, which feed on flying insects, or hedgehogs that depend on beetles and worms, a heat wave can feel more like a famine. The ripple effect through the food chain can be swift and brutal. Ponds and streams start drying up. In a heat wave, small bodies of water are often the first to vanish. Ponds, puddles, and shallow streams evaporate quickly, leaving amphibians like frogs and newts stranded. And without water, many become dehydrated. Then they can't eat, they can't escape their predators. For creatures that rely on moisture for survival, like dragonfly larvae or water beetles, it's a disaster. These habitats dry out long before most people even realise that there's a problem. And by the time they do, entire micro-ecosystems may already be lost. Soil hardens and cracks. When the ground dries out and bakes in the sun, it becomes as hard as concrete. And that's bad news for animals like earthworms, moles, or toads that live underground, as it disrupts their shelter, feeding, and moisture levels. And it's bad for the wildlife that feed on those soil dwellers too. From badgers to thrushes and blackbirds, the baked ground becomes impossible to probe. And even garden favourites like robins struggle to find a meal when their usual patch of lawn turns rock solid. Heat exhaustion affects mammals. Foxes, badgers and hedgehogs, which often forage at dawn and dusk, but in extreme heat, even those hours can still be stifling. And they may spend more time resting or hiding, missing key feeding opportunities and using more energy to stay cool. Hedgehogs in particular suffer quickly. Their small bodies dehydrate rapidly, and without easy access to water, many won't survive a prolonged heat wave. Wildlife rescues often report spikes in calls during periods of extreme heat. Bats suffer from dehydration and a lack of insects. Bats are susceptible to temperature and rely on a steady supply of flying insects to fuel their nighttime flights. But in hot, dry conditions, both of those factors take a hit. Insect populations plummet. Bat roosts, which are often in hot attics or roof spaces, become dangerously hot. Young bats are particularly at risk, and rescues frequently report pups falling from overhead roosts. In fact, all young animals are especially vulnerable because juvenile wildlife doesn't regulate its body temperature as effectively as adults. Offering water dishes and protecting natural feeding grounds such as ponds or meadows can all help support these fragile species. Whether that's a leveret curled up in the grass or a fledgling left alone in a nest, young animals are far more likely to suffer from dehydration, exhaustion, or heat stroke. And without enough shade or access to water, their survival rates drop dramatically. And sadly, many won't make it through prolonged heat unless they happen to be in a garden or green space where someone has put out water to help them. Birds struggle to remain hydrated because they cannot sweat. Therefore, they rely on finding shade, panting, and access to water to regulate their body temperature. Parents may abandon their nests if conditions become too intense, and fledglings can quickly suffer from dehydration. Bird baths and shaded feeders become essential lifelines when natural sources of water and food disappear. Nestlings and eggs overheat in their nests, and many nests are tucked away in hedges and trees, but all can become dangerously hot in the summer. When temperatures soar, some birds will abandon nesting attempts altogether, whilst others lose chicks to dehydration or overheating. And the more prolonged and more frequent the heat waves, the harder it becomes for birds to successfully breed. And reptiles like adders, grass snakes and slowworms rely on sunbathing to regulate their body temperature, but they still have a limit. If they can't find adequate shade, they risk overheating, which can lead to stress or even death. Overexposure to hot surfaces can also cause burns or disrupt normal behaviour, especially in areas where there is little ground cover. And whilst reptiles are better equipped for heat than most UK wildlife, extreme spikes still push them to their limits. In our waterways, fish are at risk from shrinking water levels. As they drop, rivers and lakes warm up and the oxygen levels plummet. Fish need that oxygen to breathe, so when the temperature rises, they start to suffocate, especially in shallow or stagnant areas. And species like trout and salmon, which prefer cooler, faster running water, are hit the hardest. In some rivers, fish kills can happen within days. Add pollution or algal blooms into that mix and the entire aquatic community is in serious trouble. The sustained heat triggers harmful algal blooms. Warm, stagnant water creates ideal conditions for blue-green algae, which can bloom quickly in ponds, lakes, and slow-moving rivers. And these blooms aren't just unsightly, they're toxic to fish and other wildlife that come into contact with them. The birds and mammals can become seriously ill from drinking the contaminated water, and the algae itself starves the water of oxygen, choking out aquatic species. It's a vicious cycle that can escalate rapidly once the weather tips into the heatwave territory. Pollinators also face a hydration crisis. Bees, butterflies, and hoverflies need water just as much as they need nectar. But during a heat wave, their usual sources can dry up. Puddles disappear, moist soil evaporates, and even the flowers they rely on for food wilt or shut down to conserve their energy. And this leads to widespread stress among pollinators, many of which already struggle with habitat loss and degradation. Offering shallow water dishes or planting drought-tolerant native flowers can help and provide a vital boost during the heat waves. Wildfires threaten entire ecosystems. Dry heathlands, moors and grasslands become tinderboxes during the prolonged heat. And if and when a fire breaks out, they don't just burn plants, they wipe out nesting birds, burrowing animals and entire insect populations. In fact, everything in their path. And even if wildlife escapes the flames, the smoke, the heat, the habitat destruction has lasting consequences. Recovery from these fires can take years, especially in ecosystems that are already under pressure from human activities. While we can't stop a heat wave, once it's here, we can make things better for the wildlife around us. Simply placing shallow water dishes, planting native shrubs for shade, and avoiding trimming the garden during hot spells can all have a significant impact. It's also a good time to rethink our outdoor spaces, because even a small patch of garden or a balcony can become a refuge for wildlife in the heat. And when we plan for wildlife, we're not just helping them survive the summer, we're also ensuring that they can come back stronger next year. Our second story is the exciting news of a new national nature reserve in the southeast. First announced in the spring of 2025, this week marked the launch of the Wealden Heaths National Nature Reserve, which expands the existing Thursley National Nature Reserve by adding 2,440 hectares of the surrounding landscape to create a larger, more connected area where nature can flourish. Wealden Heaths NNR is a mosaic of ancient and rare heathlands that spread across Surrey, Hampshire and West Sussex. And it's among England's most important sites for nature, supporting rare species including all 6 native reptile species, natterjack toads and 3 SPA designated bird species. The largest partnership NNR to date, with 9 landowners and stakeholders collaborating to achieve a landscape scale conservation that no single organisation could accomplish alone. Surrey Wildlife Trust, one of the partner organisations, will manage the National Nature Reserve, to be known as Wealden Heaths, alongside their other National Nature Reserve at Chobham Common. The new NNR will span across 2,765 hectares of land, mostly in the west and the south of Surrey, but also including areas of Hampshire and West Sussex. Alongside the new land being declared legally protected, the Wealden Heaths Nature Reserve has also incorporated areas of land that were already classified as nature reserves. These include Bagmore Common and Robborough Common in Milford, Thundry Meadows in Farnham and Thursley Common. And in addition, Wealden Heaths include the amphitheatre of the Devil's Punch Bowl. Surrey Wildlife Trust Director of Reserves Management, James Hurd, told Wildlife Matters, "With nature under unprecedented pressure, it's essential that habitats are connected and protected, not just on a local level, but on a landscape level. The creation of this reserve represents an encouraging step towards this goal and also illustrates the power of partnership working between national and local policymakers, communities, and conservationists." A statement from Natural England said, "Classifying an area as a national nature reserve is done to protect some of our most important habitats, species, and geology. National nature reserves are legally protected areas of land where artificial intervention likely to degrade the land and environment is prohibited." In England, heathlands have declined by around 80% over the last 2 centuries, making this declaration vitally important for the survival of these precious places, which serve as habitats for a range of species. Wildlife Matters thinks it's good news that the heathlands in the southeast have been recognised and protected for the unique habitat and the species that are dependent upon that heathland habitat. And our final story today highlights a report from the European Food Safety Authority, or the EFSA, regarding concerns over avian influenza. The latest findings analyse the ongoing bird flu situation in the United States and assess the potential for the virus to spread to Europe, with a particular focus on the H5N1 strain of highly pathogenic avian influenza. Between March 2024 and May 2025, the H5N1 strain was detected in dairy cattle across several US states. And although infected cows showed only mild symptoms, including decreased milk production and mastitis, the presence of the virus in cattle is a concern, as it is usually found in avian species. The virus has also been detected in raw milk, where it can remain infectious for up to 3 weeks. So far, the virus has not been found in poultry during this outbreak in the US, but the situation is being closely monitored due to the risk of the virus evolution and cross-species transmission. The EFSA has expressed concerns that the virus could reach Europe, outlining 2 main potential pathways. First risk is via migratory birds, certain species which migrate between North America and Europe, stopping in regions such as Iceland, the UK, Ireland, and parts of Scandinavia, which are considered potential entry points. The second risk area is through trade, and although unlikely, there exists a theoretical risk that infected products such as raw milk or live animals could introduce the virus if biosecurity controls failed. The EFSA has issued its recommendations for the poultry trade, which include monitoring wild bird populations, especially during migratory seasons, ensuring strict biosecurity measures on farms, and staying informed about changes in import policies and animal health alerts. Avian influenza appears to have mutated and is now commonly found in wild mammals, particularly scavenging species, and has also reached farm animals such as dairy cows. This development surely raises concerns for consumers of dairy and meat products. If any of our featured stories have interested you, please share the podcast with your colleagues, friends, or family. Thank you. And that has been this week's Wildlife Matters Nature News. I seem to find myself increasingly writing about how changes to our climate impact on wildlife, as wildlife like us cannot adapt as quickly as the changes that are happening in our world. something that has hit home to me as I take water and food out daily to help the local badgers, foxes, hedgehogs, bats and birds to get through the extended periods of high heat that we have been experiencing in the south of Britain. And of course, like many of you, being out in nature is a vital part of my life. I have an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and an understanding of wildlife and nature, but I will never stop learning every day. And that is one of the many joys for me for being out in nature. So join me on a hot summer's evening as we take a walk along an empty beach at sunset in this week's Wildlife Matters Mindful Moments. Well, I hope you enjoyed our summer evening beach walk, listening to the waves as they lapped along the shore, and to the seabirds that fill the night air with their calls and create a very unique and memorable sound escape and atmosphere that is hard not to enjoy. And now it's time for this week's Wildlife Matters, a main feature, and it's a return of the Wildlife Matters Investigates as we examine a virus that has spread worldwide. This virus originated in intensive poultry farms in the Far East and has devastated and spread through the migrating birds to every part of the globe, including the Arctic and Antarctica. And through regular mutation, it has evolved to infect mammals in the UK and around the world. So buckle up and get ready for Wildlife Matters Investigates Avian Influenza. Hello and welcome to this week's Wildlife Matters main feature. Now, you may have seen the news sites all discussing AI. Will it take away jobs and change our lives forever? Of course, that AI is artificial intelligence. And as a creator and a writer, I do have my concerns. But the AI that really worries me is avian influenza, the subject of this week's Wildlife Matters Investigates. So what is avian influenza? Avian influenza, also known as a bird flu, is an infection in birds caused by several strains of the influenza A virus. It is found in bird populations worldwide, and some of these strains have spread from intensively farmed poultry into wild bird populations. Some specific AI viruses have been defined as H5, H7 and H9 strains have also spread from infected birds to mammals, including humans, although this is usually rare. We've been aware of avian influenza for many years, decades in fact, but the virus rarely escapes the confines of the intensive chicken farms. Once HPAI is found in a poultry farm, the response is direct and brutal. All the chickens will be destroyed, a tragedy in itself, and the farm and buildings would be decontaminated with a chemical cocktail. Then an exclusion zone would be established, and any other poultry on other local farms, generally within a 10-kilometre zone, would be monitored. And if the virus was found, the whole process will repeat again. It's crude and barbaric, but the method was adequate. But in 2020, things changed. More specifically, avian influenza virus changed, or to be factual, it mutated. Something we are more aware of following that other virus that shut down the world and confined all of us to our own homes for months, also back in 2020. The H5N1 avian influenza virus has spread further than ever among wild bird populations, and it also developed the ability to jump species, specifically into mammalian species. Tens of millions of domestic poultry have been culled or died from the new variant, and millions of wild birds around the world have also died. However, very few government agencies are taking action. Some are counting the dead birds, but no data has been released. But what is clear is the devastating impact of the AI virus on wild bird populations. There has been a rise in the death of wild bird species and the animals that consume them worldwide. Moreover, the current outbreak is affecting a greater number of bird species than previously. Raptors and seabirds, which were previously not effective, have both been hit hard, but we don't know why. The genetic changes have likely enabled the virus to spread to more bird species as it mutates through each one, meaning we are now facing multiple strains of the virus. We must improve our understanding of how non-avian animals are exposed to the virus. This is essential. HPAI infects every organ of a bird's body. So when a fox eats an infected bird, it exposes its mouth, nose, and stomach to many viruses as it eats the meal. Same's true of raptors, owls, and other carnivores that feed on the infected dead birds. An outbreak of HPAI on a Spanish fur farm in October 2022 remains unexplained. According to Montserrat et al. 2022 report, the fur farm had over 30 barns and nearly 52,000 American mink were held in captivity. 13 animals were sampled in areas with high mortality, and the results were positive by PCR. The virus sequence showed that 4 samples were closely clustered, with sequences from European gold samples from various countries, including Spain, from 2022. Although wild birds that scavenged the feed were probably the source of the virus, no confirmed source or spread pathway between the mink has been established. It is also possible that the infected poultry feed was the source of the infection. Aerosol transmission between the mink has been hypothesized due to the positivity of oral pharyngeal and lung swabs, as well as the hotspots of increased mortality seen within the barns. However, it is still unclear whether fecal, oral, or indirect transmission pathways from handling animals or exposure to another as yet unknown common source can be ruled out. Avian influenza H5N1 was first detected in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada in 2022. It was believed to have travelled with migrating wild bird species from Europe, mainly geese and swan species, which appear to be hosts for the virus. It soon spread south into North America, where millions of poultry had to be destroyed and native wild seabirds were severely affected. In January 2023, it was reported that a large colony of more than 500 sea lions had died from a virus in Peru. The Gamara Toledo et al. Research Report 2023. Further investigation revealed that over 4 weeks, starting from November 2022, more than 22,000 seabirds in various coastal areas had died, with an estimated total of over 50,000 dead seabirds. Between January and February 2023, a shocking total of 634 sea lions, including both Otaria flavescens and Arctocephalus australis, were found dead in Peru. The clinical signs were observed in some live sea lions, which subsequently died, including tremors, convulsions, paralysis, and respiratory signs, such as nasal and buccal secretions. Most of the dead sea lions were female, indicating the natural colonizing behavior of mothers with pups at this time of the year, rather than dimorphic susceptibility. Several abortions were also recorded. The clinical signs of systemic infection, pneumonia, and acute encephalitis suggest that the virus causing the deaths was avian influenza. The high mortality rate in wild birds, including seabirds, is evidence of exposure to the virus. At the time of recording, it is not yet confirmed if the virus can be transmitted from mammal to mammal through direct contact, such as nose-to-nose contact, aerosol droplets in exhaled breath, fecal shedding of the virus, or other undefined indirect pathways. In the UK, there have been several confirmed cases of HPAI H5N1 infections in mammals, including the red fox, Eurasian otter, harbour seals, grey seals, common dolphins, and harbour porpoises. The government has stated that the confirmed cases of HPAI H5N1 infections in mammal species are all carnivore species that scavenge, which is believed to be the transmission route. However, this has not been confirmed. What has been confirmed is that domestic pigs, donkeys, and goats have all tested positive for H5N1. To date, the virus has been found in dead animals or those with respiratory or neurological signs such as tremors and convulsions. And these animals have been infected with the virus despite being omnivores or herbivores. The information source is DEFRA. The World Organization for Animal Health provides more information on global cases of mammal infection with influenza A of avian origin through their dashboard and situation reports. And it states that bird flu, HPAI H5N1, is circulating in wild birds, especially breeding seabirds, and it has caused significant mortality in particular species, including the great skua and gannet, and this is a clear warning. As migratory water birds return to the UK in the autumn, we should also expect to see more localised epidemics in some of these species. HPAI is undoubtedly a significant cause of concern for the conservation of wild birds. The evidence suggests that the primary path for HPAI transmission in wild birds is through saliva and nasal secretions, which can occur when the birds engage in display rituals, preening, and feed their chicks. HPAI can also be transmitted by the predation of sick birds from feces, often called guano, in and around nests and resting areas close to nests, and may even be shed via freshwater bathing areas. The government is currently stating that the transmission of the virus through scavengers' consumption of dead birds is thought to be very low. They have not commented on the carnage in the wild seabird populations, the impact this will have on raptors and owls, or how it may impact garden and woodland birds. We know that swans, geese, and ducks, all familiar on our inland waterways, are known hosts of the HPAI virus. Of course, poultry farms, especially those with intensive operations, are at the most significant risk, which has obvious potential to impact human health. It is known that HPAI can persist in the environment for some time, but high temperatures and ultraviolet radiation can destroy it. Indeed, we should take preventative action around poultry farms to reduce or eliminate the risk, but we're not. We should also be clear that HPAI is not an airborne disease. Back to the wild birds. Wildlife Matters believes the only way to monitor HPAI's impact on our seabird populations is to monitor and record not only the number of dead birds, but also their species. NGOs worldwide are collecting data on dead birds, but this data is only being shared with governments and will not be available to the public. We believe that is wrong. In the UK, each home nation has established its working groups to understand and limit the spread of the disease, but these groups have only limited measures to implement their findings. Nature Scot has established a Scottish Avian Influenza Task Force and the Nature Scot Scientific Advisory Committee AI subgroup, from which it has released guidance and, in some areas, restricted activities in seabird colonies. In England, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, the APHA, has been working with groups to monitor captive birds such as chickens and geese on poultry farms, wildlife rescue centres, and wild bird populations. They also have an expert panel of ornithological experts established in 2004 when avian influenza was first found in the UK. Wales and Northern Ireland have held regular working group meetings to prepare for and manage localised outbreaks. The Joint Nature Conservation Committee, or JNCC, works with these groups on a UK-wide basis to help them understand the impact of HPAI through national monitoring schemes and in partnerships with both the British Trust for Ornithology and the RSPB. Waterbirds, mainly migratory species such as swans, geese, and ducks, pose distinct challenges from seabirds, and the working groups will need to consider specific aspects related to monitoring and management in the event of a new surge in HPAI cases. And we can all help. It is important to report sightings of dead birds that may be affected by HPAI to the DEFRA helpline. The number is 0345 933 5577, and we will include it in the show notes. At the time of recording, in Scotland, England, and Wales, you should do this if you find one or more dead birds of prey or owls, 3 or more dead gulls or wild waterfowl such as swans, geese, and ducks, or 5 or more dead birds of any species. This seems like a clumsy and complicated reporting system, but please persist if you do see dead or dying birds. DEFRA will collect samples from these birds and determine how the disease is distributed geographically and in which species. However, it is essential to know that not all birds reported will be collected. If you find dead waterfowl, that's swans, geese, or ducks, or other dead wild birds like gulls or birds of prey in Northern Ireland, please check the DARA website for reporting options. It is also essential to state that if you come across any dead or visibly sick birds, do not touch them or pick them up. It seems clear that HPAI is here to stay. It has mutated regularly as it has moved through bird species to the point where it can and has jumped from avian to mammal species. Whilst the numbers of mammals are relatively low at present, there have been isolated cases of avian influenza in carnivorous or omnivorous mammals such as cats, tigers, leopards, bobcats, grey wolves, foxes, coyotes, minks. civets, ferrets, fishers, skunks, opossums, raccoons, black bears, brown bears, grizzly bears, harbour seals, grey seals, porpoise, white-side dolphins, bottlenose dolphins, South American sea lions, European otters, and most recently in polar bears. It is a fact that highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks in wild birds and farm poultry are no longer rare in Europe. Before 2009, it was an infrequent occurrence. In 2009, the HPAI H5 virus outbreaks in Europe were caused by the HPAI H5N1 clade 2.2 virus. Then, from 2014 onwards, HPAI H5 clade viruses dominated outbreaks with abundant genetic reassortments, yielding subtypes of H5N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, N6, and N8. And these were all in avian species. Then in 2020, we began to see the latest HPAI variants capable of infecting the mammals. There is a clear 5-year cycle of development from the first detection of HPAI in 2004, so we should anticipate a new mutation of HPA virus at some point in 2024 to 2025. We also know that most HPAI-H5 virus detections in wild and domestic birds within Europe occur during southwest and westward autumn migration and within large local waterbird colonies during winter. So we know the HPAI virus is deadly to bird species, mutates on a regular basis, approximately every 5 years, and can jump species to mammals and possibly beyond. We know the source is intensive poultry farms worldwide. The virus escapes them, enters wild populations that migrate annually and take the virus with them, allowing it to spread to all parts of the world. Wildlife Matters finds the apparent apathy of governments worldwide regarding animal welfare to be astounding and deeply concerning. We must halt the intensive farming of all animals, ensuring that those bred for meat are kept in clean, infection-free conditions. If you choose to eat meat, this should be the minimum standard that you expect. Our primary concern at Wildlife Matters is the global devastation of wild bird populations due to this virus. We aim to protect these wild populations from the detrimental impacts of our failing food system and animal husbandry practices. There is an ongoing debate about the consumption of animals and their byproducts such as dairy. But having lived a vegan lifestyle for many years, we have never felt healthier. While we acknowledge that everyone has a choice, it is clear to us that the current global food industry, focused on meat and highly processed foods, has a direct link to the rise in disease such as diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. We believe that all beings, including humans, are part of nature, and there is no necessity to consume animals or their products. Eating animals should be a personal choice made with a complete understanding of the consequences for those animals and the responsibility for one's own health and the impacts of consuming animal products. We hope you have found this Wildlife Matters Investigates deep dive into avian influenza and its devastating impact on wild bird populations informative. If you have, please do share this podcast with colleagues, friends, family, and anyone else you feel may be interested in wildlife and nature. And that has been this week's Wildlife Matters main feature. It's hard not to be concerned about the impacts of avian influenza and its spread worldwide over the last 20 years. The devastation it has caused to seabird colonies off Britain's coastline is unprecedented. Tens of thousands of birds have suffered a slow and painful death, including chicks in their nests infected by the virus. And the farmers have also faced dire consequences, with businesses closing after outbreaks resulting in the loss of everything. They too feel helpless in the face of this virus, just as we do as we try to protect the wild species. I find the responses from DEFRA and the APHA baffling. They maintain a hands-off approach and show little concern, only really saying that the risk is low when asked any questions about it. And yet, when an outbreak occurs, they create an exclusion zone of up to 10 kilometres, culling all poultry and chemically sanitising the farm, but leaving other livestock untouched. And given what we know, the disease can infect not only wild species of mammals, but also farm animals. This should raise an alarm bells for anyone consuming dairy or meat products. Please let us know in the comments if you would like us to investigate more Wildlife Matters topics. What specific issues would you like us to explore? Or if you would like an update on avian influenza in the future. As always, thank you for your time today. We hope you have learned something new from this podcast. Wildlife Matters will return in 2 weeks to discuss the physical benefits of well-being in nature. And that's one you won't want to miss. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you do enjoy what we do, please share the Wildlife Matters podcast with someone today. Keep curious, wild ones. This is Wildlife Matters, signing off.